Welcome to the Global Medical Device Podcast, where today's brightest minds in the medical device industry go to get their most useful and actionable insider knowledge direct from some of the world's leading medical device experts and companies.
I always enjoy talking to Mitch Robbins. Mitch is with the Anthony Michael Group. I learned so much. He's a recruiter specializing in quality and regulatory in the medical device industry. He's been a wonderful resource to help me personally as we're growing our team here at Greenlight Guru. And I hope you'll take a moment to see if he might be able to help you, whether you're looking to hire or you're looking for your next opportunity. Lots of great information and really great resource, really cares about this industry. And on this episode of the Global Medical Device Podcast, Mitch talks about the 4 phases of the interview process. So I learned a lot, and I hope you do as well. Hello, and welcome to the Global Medical Device Podcast. This is your host, the founder and VP of Quality and Regulatory at Greenlight Guru, John Spear. You know, from time to time, I've had this guest, and I'd like to say friend. You know, we've gotten to know each other pretty well. I hope that's accurate. But anyway, Mitch Robbins. Mitch is the managing director of the Anthony Michael Group. So, Mitch, welcome back to the Global Medical Device Podcast.
Thanks, John. How dare you call me a friend?
I feel like we're kindred spirits in some way, shape, or form. You know, we. From the first conversation we had, like, all right, this guy gets it, and you know, it's clear that you do operate differently. And folks, I would encourage you, if you're a quality and regulatory professional looking for opportunities for your expertise to shine, get a hold of Mitch. He's at the AnthonyMichaelGroup.com, all one word, no spaces, no hyphens. And I'm sure he'd be happy to chat with you. Same goes for medical device companies who are looking for regulatory and quality people as well. Mitch can help you out. So let's dive into some. I mean, when we've talked in the past, we've talked about, you know, some skills, some tips and pointers for med device professionals. You know, what they should be thinking about as far as careers concerned. And I think this is probably a little bit of a continuation of that. I thought today, though, we can sort of dissect and really break apart the interview process and talk about some pros and cons and tips and pointers there. I know you have a lot to offer there. How does that sound?
Yeah, that sounds great. I'm excited to talk with about this topic, and thanks for sharing some insight about what we do at the Anthony Michael Group. So yeah, today with this interview structure, lots to cover.
So I assume that when you talk to candidates and work with candidates, I'm assuming this because the people that you've brought to us, they seem extremely well prepared. So I guess talk a little bit about, you know, the type of work that you're doing once you get connected with somebody that's looking for an opportunity. I'm sure it's way more than them sending a resume and then you shop the resume around. So what kind of prep work do you do with a candidate first and foremost?
Yeah, so that's actually it's a really good piece that we should cover. So the whole purpose, the way we frame it to a candidate, is the whole purpose is for them to keep the ball in their court to make their own decisions. What I mean by that is for them to be able to make decisions as to whether or not they want to move forward in the process, not whether necessarily the employer wants to move forward. And the way you do that from a candidate standpoint is to establish as much value as you can throughout that initial interaction, whether it's through a Zoom meeting or a phone call. And so how we prepare that candidate is a couple different things. One, we talk about how you've got to be as specific as possible with examples of outcomes that you've delivered. So if there's something on your resume and it shows some of the outcomes you were able to achieve, you need to be able to walk the prospective hiring manager or even a human resources specialist through what was the situation, what was the solution that helped you get to the outcome. That's one piece. The next piece that is a huge pet peeve of employers, I know this for a fact, and it's a pet peeve of mine, is when a candidate gets on the phone and cannot articulate why they're interested in that prospective organization versus I'm just here to kick tires in the interview. So we encourage them to know specifically what about this organization is intriguing to them. Why did they decide to take the opportunity to speak with that employer? And it can't be driven by the location because the location is good for my family, or because the scope of responsibility is kind of what I'm looking for. It has to be something that resonates with them about the company. And then the third thing that we talk to them about is the types of questions that they can ask the employer and that they should ask. One of the biggest ways to demonstrate that you're not necessarily interested is not having any questions prepared. And so we really encourage any questions related to benefits or compensation is kind of a moot point and really should not be brought up, especially early on, because if there's no mutual interest, it's a moot point anyways. And so the questions that we encourage our candidates to really walk through, especially if they've got the hiring manager on the phone, is getting to the heart of the matter. What are the 2 or 3 critical priorities you would hope this person could address right away? Because the way we explain it to our candidates, if you understand what the pain is, you understand why they're hiring this person and what they really need help with, now you're in a position to discuss how your relevant experience can help them deal with those priorities, right? And execute on steps that are going to accomplish those priorities. So those are some of the primary things. I put together a whole prep kit for our candidates that they are able to watch, and then we get on the phone and walk through it. But really, those are the most important pieces. Other than also, I've seen this too, John. I don't know if this happened to you as a hiring manager, but people letting on prematurely that they're not interested. Especially when somebody's gainfully employed, it's such a shame to let on prematurely that you might not be interested, because if a couple of days go by and you digest the insight that you learned on that initial call and you change your mind, it's like prying open a door with a screwdriver versus making sure that the hiring manager knows that you are interested and giving yourself the opportunity to digest. And if there are any concerns, be able to go back and work through them. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. So, and these are all things that you and your team are working with candidates on before the interview process, which,
That's right.
And we'll talk about, kind of breaking down the interview process here in a moment. But I could say, I know when you send somebody my way that you've already made an investment. You've already spent a lot of time with them. You've already gone through some of these basics. And I could tell you, I'm sure I've shared this with you before, but I'll repeat it, that the candidates that I talk to that come from the Anthony Microgroup, they've done their homework. They know about what we're doing at Greenlight Guru. They have a pretty good idea of what the role is. They typically have a pretty solid list of questions, not like well thought out questions, where they've kind of put themselves, at least mentally speaking, in the role and trying to understand sort of the day to day. So that's made the quality of those first phone interviews that we do with candidates so much more productive. So I appreciate that work.
Awesome.
Let's break down the interview. Let's talk about it. So what are the parts of the interview from your way of thinking about it?
Yeah. So before, I want to preface this by saying there was a study out recently, I don't know how long ago, but at least within the last year, maybe 2, by a company called Leadership IQ. They are quoted saying that 46% of all new hires will fail within the first 18 months. That's literally almost the flip of a coin.
That's crazy.
In that same time frame, they are quoted by saying that organizations reported 19% of new hires would actually be considered a success. So when you think of the stats and the way people normally interview, it's just staggering to me. Think about Russian roulette. There's 6 bullets in the chamber. So your odds are better playing Russian roulette than they are, as far as incurring a mishire. So what I'm going to share is really kind of how to help de-risk your hiring process to the best of your ability and really avoid these costly mishires. And we break it down into 4 pieces. There is the initial assessment, there's the competency interview, there's the DNA interview, and then there's the test drive. And we can kind of go through an overview of each one of those if you'd like.
Yeah, I think that'd be good. And I guess help me make sure we're thinking about this the same way. So is this breakdown of an interview from the perspective of the hiring manager or from the candidate?
From the company side, yep.
Okay, from the hiring manager. All right. So the initial assessment, the competency interview, the DNA interview, and the test drive.
That's right.
All right. So let's talk about some key points and tips and pointers for each of those. So let's start first with that initial assessment. What is that all about? What should I be doing during that stage or phase of the interview process?
Sure. So a couple things. recognizing the talent market that we're in today, especially in the regulatory and quality space, where there's virtually almost zero unemployment. I think often employers forget to put on their selling hat early and often, and really being able to flush out what the employer value proposition is, and really make sure the person who's on the phone, who's more than likely gainfully employed elsewhere, truly understands what's going on there, what the overarching vision is, how this person can fit in, and maybe what the career trajectory could look like for them. So really making sure to include what the employer value proposition is, but then the initial assessment, whether it's done over the phone or it's done perhaps through video interviewing, is obviously just the overview of ensuring that they've got enough of the ability to do the job so that you can decide to come in and on site and do a deeper dive, which we'll get into with the competency interview. But I would encourage that sometimes bigger companies, they offload this to human resources, and they see human resources as the gateway to the company. That's no problem. I would just encourage that human resources is not just checking boxes. Do you have 7 to 10 years of experience? Yes, you do. Have you written a 510K? Yes, you have. I would really make sure that you collaborate with your hiring manager and say, okay, and I'll get into this a little bit more with the competency interview, but truly, what are the core competencies that is going to help predict future success? And what 2 or 3 questions can I answer or ask on the phone, share those answers with you, and determine if we should move forward in the process. So in essence, the initial assessment is really a screen to ensure, okay, they actually can do the job they say they can do based on their resume.
Yeah. And I know when you and I first started working together that there was work before that. And in a good way, you kind of ripped apart my job description. You're like, John, what is this? You didn't say garbage, but that's what I heard. This is garbage. But it was helpful. No, but it was helpful because, I'm not an artist when it comes to writing job descriptions per se. So you really said, well, let's tweak this, let's work on this, let's update this. And I think by doing so, that actually helped you as well as helped me and make sure that we had clarity as much as possible so that we're not wasting each other's time. So there's that pre-work, but that initial assessment, I like those tips and pointers a great deal. So I get through that initial assessment stage in the interview. And I guess before we leave that, though, I mean, do you have any best practices, pro tips? I mean, I typically do a phone interview or a phone screen kind of as that first initial assessment. You mentioned video. I mean, what kind of trends are you seeing, or what tips would you recommend of one versus the other?
Trends. So my recommendation, if it's possible, is a combination. I think that especially the higher level that you go, you want to be able to screen for executive presence, and being able to have a video meeting versus a phone meeting really can help the candidate shine. But one of the trends we're seeing right now is on-demand interviews, where an organization will come up with 2 to 4 specific competency-related questions. The candidate on their own time can sit down and record their answer. I think there's a couple of things.
That's cool.
I think on one hand, it's really cool because you're catering to the fact that you don't have to worry about scheduling conflicts, and you can get across the message that you want, and they can get across the message that they want. The downside is it gives an opportunity for them to potentially over-prepare. I see that as a potential downside. But overall, we're seeing that as a trend. And yeah, otherwise, I would say if you're asking me my opinion, I think it could be a combination of both.
That's interesting. That's something remind me the next person you bring my way, we might try that, because I kind of like that idea, because specifically for the role that I'm looking to fill, these quality regulatory professionals, they're interacting with medical device companies all over the globe, and almost every time, 100% of the time is probably more accurate, it's remote. So they're talking to folks from our offices here in Indianapolis. Sometimes there's a video component. So it's a great way for that person to demonstrate their ability to communicate effectively and concisely. So I kind of like that idea. That's a good tip. All right. So the next phase or stage, we start to get into the competency side of things. So what are some tips and pointers that you can offer there?
Sure. So now keep in mind, think about a funnel, right? We had a variety of candidates do the initial assessment. Now we're kind of whittling down to a smaller slate of candidates that you want to spend the time, energy, and money bringing on site. Now that they're on site, the competency interview really absolutely has to be done by the hiring manager, because the hiring manager really knows, for lack of a better term, what are the core competencies that this person needs to have to be able to be effective in this job. And so I'll kind of break out a structure for you of what this might look like. When the person gets there, obviously break the ice and have some introductions and, really just basically make the conversation warmed up a little bit. It's a good opportunity to kind of give a recap as to what's going on with the company, maybe share some highlights since you spoke on the phone or did the interview. And one of the things that I would strongly recommend, give them an opportunity to ask some questions first before you dig in. There's a lot of truth that can be told here. It gives you an idea of what their level of interest is, depending on how much selling you have to do based on some of their questions. So it'll show you, it'll be pretty indicative of the preparation and research they've done and tell you a lot about what they find important based on the questions they are asking you. So do they ask you about challenges in, for example, your quality environment, or is it only more so questions about what you have to offer them? Keep in mind, elite talent really want challenge and they want excitement. And so if their questions are more related to, what's going on and how can they help, it's pretty indicative of the type of person you have in front of you. And also it gives you an opportunity to really know, okay, here's some of the things I want to go back and touch on to help kind of solidify their interest based on what they're telling you is important to them. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. For me, I want to, and this is an escalation. Well, maybe I should not assume that. Do you recommend breaking these 4 stages up into 4 separate events, or can you combine these into one, or is that semantics?
That's a great question. Yeah, no. So definitely. So that kind of gets into streamlining your process, which is another huge important piece in landing talent today. Is the more expeditious you can be, the better chance you're going to have in landing talent. So to answer your question, no, this could be all in one day. It's just a matter of who's doing what in terms of who you have to meet on the team.
Yeah, and I think you're pretty familiar with the approach that we take. So typically, I'm the one that's performing that initial assessment.
Yep.
And then the competency side of things, I will pair the candidate up with somebody on our team, so that my team member can really evaluate the candidate's ability to do the job, and then also give that candidate a much clearer picture of what the day-to-day is like.
That's exactly right.
Yeah. Okay. All right. So folks, let me take a quick pause, just to remind you that I'm talking with Mitch Robbins. Mitch is the managing director of the Anthony Michael Group. Anthony Michael Group, check them out at theanthonymichaelgroup.com. Really great resource if you're looking for folks, or if you're somebody that's looking, especially in the med device space. Their specialty is really quality and regulatory, but they're hiring in all sorts of other roles as well. But go check them out. And want to take a quick moment to remind you all, Greenlight Guru, this is what do we do? Why are we here? So Greenlight Guru, we're the only medical device quality management software in the market today. We are designed exclusively for the medical device industry, and the product has been designed by actual medical device professionals. So that's really important, especially in today's ever-changing regulatory market. It seems like every week we get a new notification about something, some set of regulations somewhere in the world is being updated. Well, we got you covered. If you're looking for a fresh approach to quality and to streamline your efficiency and your team and get products to market faster, safer, and higher quality, then you should go check it out at www.greenlight.guru. So anyway, let's get back to the 4 stages of an interview. We've talked about the initial assessment. We've talked about the competency interview. Next piece is the DNA interview. So what is that all about?
Sure. And I want to mention one more thing, John, before we move on to the DNA piece. So with the competency interview, another recommendation that I would like to add is when the hiring manager is going through a deep dive of the person's background, you're looking for a theme to show this, to kind of be able to create a picture of what this person's career trajectory has looked like to date. And so a lot of people, when they're interviewing, they'll start with the person's most recent position first. My recommendation is to go back 10 years, or if the person doesn't have 10 years of experience, go back to the person's earliest position and ask. So I'm going to give you a couple of ideas of questions that you can ask. The whole purpose is you're trying to really put together a roadmap of, is this person pretty consistent over time? The other thing I would say is we've seen more success hiring for momentum versus hiring laterally. Usually when you're hiring somebody for momentum, meaning upside talent that sees this as a stretch, and it might be a stretch competency-wise too, they've got a chip on their shoulder. They've got something to prove. They want to be there. It's exciting to them, and they're going to push hard. So when you're doing this deep dive across their background, a couple of the major questions that I would definitely encourage people to ask is asking about quantifiable accomplishments. You want to make sure that the person in front of you can articulate how did they help the organization either make money, save money, or improve a process that ultimately, in one way, shape, or form, move the company forward. Not every position is tied to profitability or tied to revenue, but it is tied to process improvement in one way, shape, or form. And if they can't quantifiably tell you how they contributed to at least one of those things, I would have a hard time having confidence in the fact of their ability to help you do something similar. If they can talk about quantifiable accomplishments, the next piece is, can they articulate how they did it? This is where the rubber hits the road, because again, it goes back to that situation, solution, and then the outcome. So if they can walk you through, here was the situation, here was the solution, it gives you some legitimate sense that, okay, this person has done what they say. Does that make sense?
Yeah, for sure. I couldn't agree more. And I'll save this to the end, but I have a burning question that I want to ask you. But let's get to, okay, fine. Let's just do it now. So I don't know how to label this, and I hope this is PC. So the fact that I'm putting that disclaimer means that it might not be. But
this is why we're friends.
Yeah, no. The rebound. So if I'm interviewing a candidate who maybe their last position or the current position they're in, or some of their previous career stops, let's say, haven't been good experiences, it kind of throws a flag up for me sometimes. Like, I don't want to be the rebound employer, Are they just trying to escape the current situation or their past situation because it's been so bad? And I don't know. It creates a little bit of a red flag. I just was curious what your thoughts might be on that.
So I would tell you that your red flag is human nature. I think it would throw a red flag for most. What I would tell you is, because somebody left an organization or was terminated isn't a reason to stop a process, but how do they explain it to you? Are they honest? Are they direct? Do they do their best to explain it? I would tell, just like when a candidate interviews for a company, I always say, there's a position for everybody, but just because it's not culturally right doesn't mean that there's something wrong with either party. It's just not right. So to your question, I would say a couple things. Are they transparent and explain from their standpoint, what they believe was the case? And then two, a way to give yourself comfort is always what we call the backdoor reference check, which maybe we can do on another podcast. But in essence, a backdoor reference check, you can call anybody. You can call previous supervisors and ask for yourself. There's nothing illegal about that.
All right, good tip. All right, so let's...
Now, I wouldn't call their current supervisor. Yes, you get a sense,
yeah,
right?
All right, yeah. Good.
Hear me loud and clear, not their current supervisor.
Yeah, not their current one. Yeah, good point. All right, so let's talk about the DNA interview stage.
Yep. Okay. So the DNA interview, here's what I call elite talent DNA. If you're a small company, this can be across your organization. If you're a bigger company, it's more applicable probably for your functional area. What you want to do is you want to look at your top performers in the organization. And you want to use maybe a whiteboard and get people in the room who are influencers within the company and brainstorm how many characteristics that these top performers share in common. You want to put up as many possible as you can. And then you want to whittle it down to potentially 3 to 5 that you think you need to be headstrong on, that anybody coming into the organization needs to have as a characteristic in their own right. The more you can do this and the more you can stay headstrong with sticking to those 3 to 5 characteristics that you think are vital, the more you're going to build a culture of performance. And so what the DNA interview really is delegating this to other. So remember when you asked me during, does this have to be multiple parts? I said, no, you could do this all in one day. This is really where you can have the peer groups or other executives, whoever else is going to be meeting this person, ask some of these questions. And in essence, DNA characteristics sound a lot like behavioral skills because in essence, they really are. So this is where a lot of the behavioral based questions can come in. And so some of the examples, I could give you some examples. Let's see. Tell me about your best boss ever and tell me about your worst boss ever. Why? And elite talent really, in my opinion, have high expectations of their leadership because they need to feel like somebody's going to lift them up, right? And continue to push them. So it gives you good context into what drives them and what doesn't drive them. You can ask about, tell me the work environment you thrived in the most. Tell me about the most challenging work environment you've had to work in and why. What you're trying to do is you're trying to ask questions that get at answers that will help you see if it aligns with the core DNA of your company or your functional area. Does that make sense?
It totally does. Whenever we bring somebody in, we do the competency. Well, we do continue the competency and the DNA all on site. And we would refer to the DNA in our terminology as the culture interview. And so, of course, everyone on the team that would be working with the person is assessing that from their lens as well as the competency. But we invite somebody outside our organization, and our CEO likes to play this part because he's the key protector, if you will, or promoter of the company culture. And so he'll talk to the candidate. He doesn't assess the technical chops or the skills or the competency of the person at all. He's just simply looking, is this person going to be a fit for where we are and where we're going? So I think it's really, really important. And because we've talked to people who they have the technical acumen to do the job, but they weren't going to fit within this DNA at Greenlight. So very important that you have both.
Not only that, but I want to hammer this in. A lot of times organizations are in a very difficult spot where they've got pressure to deliver on their objectives and they need a butt in the seat and they overlook some of these things thinking, okay, you know what, this person can do the job, let's just move forward. I would rather see that company maybe bring on a contractor to alleviate the temporary pain versus bring somebody in who can truly do some major damage in a short amount of time to somebody's culture. For sure.
I mean, and I think, I don't know, of course, how everybody does hiring in their organization. My personal approach is I include pretty much my entire team in the entire process. We're very transparent. I share with them the candidates that are coming in, how the conversations are going. We talk a lot about culture. It's a two-way street. I mean, I can't force you to be a participant in this culture. You have to have a willingness to do so as well. So, it's both sides have contribution to the culture. And I think because of that, we've been in some situations at Greenlight where it's like, man, we need a butt in the seat. And, we've talked to some folks that are like, yeah, they could probably fit. And then we stuck to, it was hard, but we stuck to it. We're like, no, not a good culture fit. We'd rather have a little bit more suffering, have too much on our plates and get through this rather than make a bad hire. And I think it goes back to the stats that you mentioned at the beginning of the podcast.
Yeah, and I would say that what John is saying right now is absolutely true because I've seen it firsthand from his organization, and I have respect for that. So, yeah, I think you guys do a great job with that as a company.
All right, so let's round it out, and let's talk about the final stage of the interview process, the test drive.
So this is probably one of my my favorite part of what we're talking about today, and very few organizations actually implement this step, and I'm not necessarily sure why. But I want to share another study with you. There was a study at the University of Massachusetts by two gentlemen, Brent Weiss and Robert S. Feldman. And in this study, it was found that 81% of people lied about themselves during job interviews. In essence, the participants in the study told an average of almost 2.5 lies per 15-minute interview.
Shut up.
Yep.
Oh my God. No, I'm just saying that's interesting to me.
So it said, and what's crazy is we're on a podcast that has a lot of technical listeners that have technical backgrounds. Interestingly, within the study, the rate of deception also increased when the job requirements were more technical. I don't know why, but obviously because applicants were maybe trying to compensate for their lack of job required skills. But the reason I bring up this study is because here is truly where you have a golden opportunity to avoid these dreaded mishires. A test drive, in essence, is putting your finalist, if not maybe your two finalists, in a real life scenario with either a case study. It could be a made up one, but that's very similar to an issue you're dealing with within your business. It could be a real live business problem that the organization is trying to solve as it is, and put them in a real life situation to perform the job that they would in essence perform. There is no better way to interview somebody than to give them a real life scenario and see how they do.
Yeah, I like that too. I mean, situational awareness. I mean, it's easy for us to all sit around and chit chat about the job and that sort of thing, but to actually give a real scenario, I think that's really good advice. So, man, this is gold, folks. If you're hiring managers, I hope you take these tips to heart, and I hope you weave them into your own interviewing process. And candidates, I think, I guess if it were me looking for a job and a potential employer didn't take this sort of due diligence with me during the interviewing process, it might raise a flag for me too. So, this is good information on both sides of the equation. Mitch, any last tips or points that you want to leave the audience with before we wrap up this episode?
Yeah, I appreciate that. I guess I would just say a word of warning on the test drive. Never surprise a candidate with the test drive. I think it leaves a bad impression as far as putting somebody on the spot without enough time to properly prepare. I would make them aware that that's going to be part of the process, but you don't necessarily have to tell them exactly what the test drive is going to consist of. It's one thing to have a couple surprises as far as what the topic at hand is going to be, but at least give them an opportunity to prepare and knowing that something like that is going to come. Then the other, I guess, point we can leave with is just how it can be almost cliche when people say, mishire. But the truth of the matter is, I mean, these are real life studies. Costs can be astronomical, 13, 15 times a leader's salary. And I think if you take the time to really kind of be methodical with your interview process, it doesn't need to be elongated. It can still be methodical with some of these elements. And then again, I commend you and Greenlight Guru for being headstrong as far as knowing what is going to work for the company and what's not. But if you are in a bind and you do need talent, any day of the week, bring in a contractor before ruining your culture. That's my opinion.
Good advice. Mitch, thank you so much. I always learn so much when you and I chat on these podcasts. So again, thank you so much for being willing to being a recurring guest on the Global Medical Device Podcast. Again, folks, I encourage you to check out the work that Mitch and his team are doing. Go to the AnthonyMichaelGroup.com. Get a hold of them. I know they're ready to help. One final thing that I'll leave you with, and this is hot off the presses. Of course, by the time this podcast goes live, it may not be entirely as hot as it is in the moment, but Greenlight Guru YouTube channel is alive. So go check it out. You'll get to see my beautiful shining face talking about all sorts of things related to med device professionals. Just go to YouTube and type in Greenlight Guru and you'll get there. There's quite a few videos, so be sure to check that out. As always, thank you so much for being listeners of the Global Medical Device Podcast. Share this with your friends and continue to keep the Global Medical Device Podcast as the #1 podcast in the medical device industry. As always, it's a great pleasure to be your host, the founder and VP of Quality and Regulatory at Greenlight Guru, John Spear. Thank you.